My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Go over to CounterPunch, get your subscription to CounterPunch Plus. That's how you support our project. We've been around for 30 plus years. We're going to be around for many, many more. CounterPunch is a unique space on the left. It provides a platform for many different competing views, both from the United States, but from the broad international left as well. I think CounterPunch is quite useful in that regard, and I've been a reader much longer than I've been hosting this show. So if you agree with that, go over to CounterPunch, get your subscription, be a supporter. We greatly appreciate it. And with that said, I want to turn to my guest today. I'm very, very happy to speak with him, somebody I've been meaning to chat with for quite a while. It's Ilya Budraitskis. Ilya is with us here on CounterPunch. He is a historian and political activist of the Russian left. He is a member of the Russian socialist movement, longtime activist, veteran. He's also an author. The most important book, the one that you absolutely have to get, Dissidents Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia. Ilya Budraitskis, welcome to CounterPunch.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for your great work. And I want to just begin, well, not so really at the beginning, but kind of at the beginning for many people. And that would be February of last year. Russia launches its invasion of Ukraine. This is, of course, a monumental couple of days, both obviously for people in Ukraine, but of course for those in Russia, those on the left, especially in Russia. So Ilya, tell me about your experience. You heard the news on the morning of the 24th. What happened next?
Yes, definitely, it was a great shock for me and for many, despite the fact that I was following all the very scaring news about the concentration of the Russian troops on Ukrainian border in January 2022 and even in the autumn of 2021. And of course, we had a lot of discussions with my comrades, with my colleagues about the possible outcome of this of the situation on Ukrainian border. And our, let's say, main expectation was that the full-scale invasion is hardly possible, and mostly because of of the lack of any political rationality in this decision. So it was hard to imagine how, let's say, Putin's Russia can manage the political situation in Ukraine. How Ukraine could be incorporated into Putin's Russia with the presence of the Russian troops. So this whole plan looked really like something unbelievable. And when when it finally happened, of course, it was a great shock. And the same day in the evening, I joined the anti-war protest in Moscow, which was not very big, and which was illegal, as most of the protests in Russia during past years. More than 1,000 people were arrested in Moscow this evening, and it was clear that there is no ground for massive resistance against the war. So it was quite clear that majority of Muscovites, majority of Russians, they are not ready to protest, and they were taking this decision of Putin as a sort of fate. You know? which was very typical for the type of political consciousness that was produced in Putinist Russia during all the 20 years of its existence. And then after this protest in Moscow, I went to St. Petersburg because my wife was there in that moment, and I spent like few days there. Together, we came to the protests, anti-war protests in St. Petersburg, which were actually a bit bigger than in Moscow, a bit more lively, more active, but also they represented a tiny minority of of people in St. Petersburg. And what was also important in this protest that only young people were taking part. So, 99% of the participants of this protest were people, let's say, from um, 18 to 25. And then after this few days, we decided to leave. Uh,
Before you get to your decision to leave, can you tell me very quickly, and I kind of already know the answer, but I'd like for you to explain how different what you saw in terms of the anti-war protest was versus the protests that had come around the elections the prior year, which were massive, which were in many cities and were rather widespread. How would you compare and contrast the two, or were they?
I will say that the last massive protests in Russia happened in the very beginning of 2021, when Alexei Navalny came from Germany and was immediately arrested in Russia. So in that moment, I will say some tens of thousands people uh, came to the streets of Moscow and other Russian cities, and that was the biggest protest before the war. After the parliamentary elections in September of the same year, the protests were not so big, and I will say that the destruction of the structures of Navalny during 2021 was a very important step in the preparation to the common invasion, because the government destroyed the structure which was the most, let's say, effective, which was the most attractive, which could be let's say the leading body that can organize, and was able to organize the let's say national-wide protests against the war. And in the moment when the war started, this organization, Navalny organization, was already uh, uh, labeled as extremist. It was totally criminalized. And in fact, all these anti-war protests in the beginning of invasion, they were spontaneous. There was no any clear strategy behind this protest, and there was no any, let's say, organizing body.
Okay, so bring us back to a few days after the invasion. You're essentially you're looking at the landscape, the political landscape, the opportunities that may or may not still be there, and you make the decision to leave. What motivates that, and what happens next?
So you have to understand that during these few days after the start of the invasion, the situation was changing like rapidly. Like in a few days, all the opposition media that remained until that moment, they were shut down. Also, all the flights to the European countries, to the European Union, they were cancelled. The first sanctions against Russia were already implemented. So the future was very unclear, let's say. Yeah, and the first idea was to leave the country, maybe for some time, maybe for some weeks, just to to have a look what will going on, and also the perspectives of the war was very unclear, because even after first 3 days, um, it was visible that the Putin's plan didn't work. That Kiev was not taken over. That this war will continue for some time. And the outcome of all this situation was very unclear.
Okay, let me ask you, if you could, to explain for us, for our listeners, for our viewers, how we would describe the left in Russia, because we have one of the largest parties in the country, which is the KPRF, the Communist Party, that we know. We have smaller parties as well. There are other groups that might make up what you might call the broad left, trade unions and so forth. Could you just sketch out what the Russian left looks like for our listeners?
I will probably explain what it looked like to the moment when this war was started. So, to this moment, Russia already became an authoritarian state. Uh, Already, many people became political prisoners, and from the left as well. That was a country which was already in, let's say, 8 years conflict with Ukraine. It was a country which was already very much affected by the chauvinistic imperialist propaganda coming from the government. And I mean, and the rules of the game inside the country was striking, every month before the invasion. So not so much things were possible in terms of public politics. So, for example, it was not possible to, I don't know, to organize a May Day legal demonstration in Moscow. It was not possible to organize the big congress, for example, of, I don't know, political or social movements in some place in the city. So the situation already was pretty much controlled from the top. In terms of the political left, the main I will start from the most radical part to the Communist Party. So the most of repressions came against the anarchist and antifa groups in years before the war. So the, let's say, antifa scene in Moscow, which, let's say, 10 years ago was very important, very active, very big. They could mobilize thousands of young people to the streets. So that scene was already destroyed. Many activists were arrested or forced to leave. The same you can say about the anarchist groups, but of course Antifa and anarchist groups were very much related. But you can say that the number of anarchist groups were already destroyed by the government to that moment. So on this side, Antifa and the anarchist movement, the situation was already quite bad, I will say. Then you had
And by the way, I'm sorry, Ilya, just listeners, if you want to go back a couple of years, we wrote about in CounterPunch repression against anarchist activists in Crimea, those that had been jailed in Crimea for their work, as well as those that Ilya is referring to in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and elsewhere. We did have several articles about that in CounterPunch back, I don't know, 2015, 16, 17, 18, in those years. Go ahead, Ilya.
Yeah. The repressions were very serious. Yes, so there were cases of tortures and all this kind of things. So the aim was to disorganize this scene as a whole. So then you can say that there were some kind of radical left outside of the communist party, let's say various Trotskyist groups, and of course many kind of Stalinist groups and networks. To the moment of the start of the invasion, let's say main three Trotskyist groups, they were against invasion. Before they were against the say anti-democratic measures of the government. Most of them supported the anti-corruption protests, like those that was organized by Navalny group. And all of them were pretty involved in the various unionist and students activities. Then there were a number of Stalinist groups, and it's important thing that the big split inside the Russian left in terms of let's say attitude to the imperialist ambitions of the government happened already after 2014, after the annexation of Crimea and the start of the Russian military involvement in the east of Ukraine, because a number of Stalinist groups they supported in one way or another the Russian government, and even some figures from the democratic left, like Boris Kagarlitsky, they supported the Russian government. They supported the annexation of Crimea with some kind of explanations that it is the form of the struggle against Western imperialism. Also, they pointed out that in the east of Ukraine there was some workers' self-organization, so it was mostly kind of class-based movement and not invasion. So then you have the Communist Party. the Communist Party, which of course played an important role in the Putin's political system. So it was the party of the, let's say, of the managed democracy. So it was a party which never had the full agency. So it's hard to imagine.
Controlled opposition.
Yes,
Controlled opposition.
controlled opposition. So it means that all the leading figures of the Communist Party, they consulted with Kremlin about all the main, let's say, political questions. Financially, they were also very much dependent by the state. So to the last year, I think that 80% of the budget of the Communist Party came from the state as the donations that any Russian party presented in the parliament could gain from the state. So, but at the same time, there was a contradiction in between the political orientation of the leadership of the Communist Party and its electoral base. This electoral base was changing. It was becoming much more younger, much more presented in the big cities, and much more growing because of the growing oppositional sentiment in the Russian society in general. So the vote for the Communist Party became the only possible way inside this system to express your your dissatisfaction with the social situation, dissatisfaction with the political regime, and so on. Also, it's important to stress that the let's say ideology of the Communist Party, the ideological orientation of its leading members all the time was not just Stalinist but also Russian nationalist. So the Russian nationalism was the integral part of the program of the Russian Communist Party from its very beginning, from the early 90s, when all the things about Orthodox Christianity, that is a very important thing. Russian civilization, which is different from the West. So West is capitalist, West is mercantilist, it's egoist, but the Russian civilization is kind of naturally socialist in some ways. So justice is a part of the Russian culture, of the Russian history and things like this. So you can see that the distance between this kind of ideas and the anti-capitalism of, for example, Nazis in the 30s in Germany, who also condemned the Anglo-Saxon capitalism and confront this Anglo-Saxon capitalism with the proletarian nature of the German nation. So you can see that they're comparable. You know, these forms of nationalist, imperialist sort of anti-capitalism, where the anti-capitalism itself became like an empty signifier that could be fulfilled with all possible kinds of the nationalist ideas. That's why, of course, why the leadership of the Communist Party from the very beginning supported the annexation of Crimea, supported the aggressive politics against Ukraine and against the whole, let's say, post-Soviet space. So the idea that the current Russian Federation is the geopolitical catastrophe, is the product of some kind of defeat in the Cold War, and the aim of Russia to restore its like historical integrity, which is the same that to restore the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was, according to this approach, more about territory, but not so much about certain ideas and programs and so on. So this kind of very chauvinist view was always typical for the leadership and a big part of the membership of the Russian Communist Party.
In a sense, it's like Soviet nostalgia in the service of Russian imperial revanchism, combined with that, Russian nationalist, or what Lenin would have called Great Russian chauvinism.
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to stress again that the significant part of the Communist Party voters, they voted not for the ideas of chauvinist revenge. They voted for democracy, and they voted for social justice, because in fact, to the moment when the Russian troops start to be concentrated near Ukrainian border, the program of imperialist revenge already was a program of Kremlin. It was already a program of United Russia. Yeah, and there were not so much differences in the sense between the Communist Party, the leadership of the Communist Party, and Putin and his party, United Russia.
I'm so happy to have you here to give us this perspective, because I've been meaning to ask. Well, actually, I think I asked Boris Kagarlitsky when he was on the show a number of months ago, but I want to ask you: is the question of Lenin debated? Is it part of the discourse? Because Putin started this war with his grand speech where he implicates Lenin specifically, the Bolsheviks, that the entire problem of Ukraine is essentially a product of the dastardly Bolsheviks and their plots, you understand? So this is the legacy of the left. This is the revolutionary legacy for, Marxists today. Is this contested? Is it even possible to contest this historical interpretation in anything but, on the fringes?
Yes. So the place of Lenin in the official Kremlin's ideology, in the official, let's say, politics of memory in Russia was very controversial, because as the politician, as the individual, he was always criminalized. He was always portrayed as a kind of negative figure. And what Putin said about Lenin, who created Ukraine, in his famous speech before invasion, it was not the first time when he condemned Lenin in this way. So even for example in 2014, when the annexation of Crimea happened, and also it was the anniversary of the First World War, Putin gave a speech on nearby some new monument to the heroes of the First World War, and he literally repeat the idea of a knife on a knee, that the victory was near in the 1917. uh, the victory of the Russian army, but the Russian soldiers were betrayed by revolutionary fanatics, by people like Lenin, who played a significant role in the destruction of the Russian Empire, and then put a time bomb on the foundation of the Soviet Union. So it's one of the important sides of Putin's character, that he's repeating and developing the same ideas again and again, and this kind of anti-Leninist stance for him was very um, uh, let's say typical.
Right.
But also the official line in Russia, based on the idea of the continuity of the Russian history, based on the idea that during all its history, it was the same state, it was the same territory, it was the same people, but occasionally under the different names and different political systems. So, in this sense, the Lenin's Russia was the same Russia as in the times of the empire, but in a kind of new form. In the same way, the post-Soviet Russia was the same as the Soviet, but also in some new historical form. If you want to find some ideological like roots of this idea of the historical continuity, you have to look to the legacy of this so-called smena vekhovцы, change of the signposts, yeah, group of the white Russian immigrants in 20s, who called for the support of the Soviet Union, and especially the support of the emerging Stalin's dictatorship as a new form of the Russian Empire. And this idea was very much distributed in that time in various forms in the Russian white immigration. Yes, so I think that these ideas were taken and adopted somehow in the present Russia.
And it's also, I mean, it's partially a rejection of Lenin as a historical figure and as a political actor, but it's not so much that Putin cares as much about Lenin's ideas about democratic centralism, about how you debate, Bolshevik, positions, so much as it feels like Lenin's real rejection of Lenin is the rejection on the question of the right of nations to self-determination, on the question of the rights of peoples of the former empire, right? That's ultimately what Putin seems to be objecting to, the idea that Lenin and his faction of the Bolsheviks had, that peoples of the quote unquote prison house of nations should be able to determine their own futures.
Yeah, I pretty agree with it. Yeah, and of course, Putin share the national program taken from the White Army, let's say in the Civil War, and not the Bolsheviks.
Let's take a quick break. On the other side of the break, I'm going to continue the conversation with Ilya Budraitskis. There's so much to talk about. We could go for many hours. We won't do that this time, but stick with us and go over to CounterPunch, get your subscription. We'll talk to you again in a few minutes.
Okay, so now
we'll just take 10 seconds, unless do you need to get up? Do you need to take a break? You can.
No.
Okay, good. And we are back chatting with Ilya Budraitskis. Again, the book, I would highly recommend you get yourselves a copy. Dissidents Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia, came out just before the war began. So quite a lot has happened in the last 16 months or so, but I would definitely recommend you get yourselves a copy. So Ilya, before the break, we were talking a little bit about Putin and his historical perspective. And I want to you mentioned a little bit about the intellectual origins of some of these ideas, Ivan Ilyin and others, of course. But there are other figures that you wrote about in your book that don't have as much of a historical spotlight that I think that you wanted to spotlight, a tradition of thought in the Soviet Union that is to a large degree unknown. Can you explain a little bit more about that from your book?
My book is partly devoted to the to the legacy of the dissidents movement in the Soviet Union, and especially I was interested in the legacy of the socialist left-wing dissidents in the Soviet Union, starting from late 50s to the early 80s. So let's say to the post-war Soviet Union. And in this research, I had a clear like political interest, because for me this legacy was so important exactly because of the need of continuity. Of the historical continuity. I think that one of the major problems of the Russian left was the lack of this continuity. So there is a famous definition of Hannah Arendt about the say legacy without the завещание.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I don't know that one. I
Yeah,
can't
so
translate that one.
basically that you have a legacy, but you have no access to this legacy. You have
Okay.
no like direct link with this legacy. And that is exactly about the type of the relations between the legacy of the Russian Revolution, the legacy of the Bolshevism, revolutionary Marxism of the beginning of the 20th century, and the post-Soviet left. Because definitely there was a rupture. There was a tragic rupture because of Stalinist terror, because of the repressive regime in the Soviet Union, because of the revolutionary Marxism was turned into kind of official ideology, which was totally dogmatic and non-reflective, and which was the main problem with the official Marxism in Soviet Union, that it was the way of the permanent distortion of the picture of the reality. So that Marxist language was used not in order to explain the true nature of things, but in order to cover true nature of things, to give another names, another explanations to the real problems, real class conflicts, and so on and so forth. So just a main example of it, that the very existence of the ruling elite of the Soviet Union, the bureaucracy, nomenclatura, or whatever, was covered by the official Marxism, because according to official explanation of the Soviet society, for example, in 60s and 70s, was the idea that in the so the Soviet Union is not fully communist, so that still a sort of transitional state. But in this transitional state, you have two classes, which are friendly classes, uh, which sounds like a nonsense from the Marxist point of view, but two friendly classes, and one and they are peasants and workers, and one layer. So it's not a real class, but kind of a layer between these two, and that is intelligentsia, the intellectual kind of strata. And this kind of official explanation of of the structure of the Soviet society was established in order to cover the existence of social strata of let's say nomenclatura, the social strata of bureaucracy. And all these questions, all these differences and striking conflicts between the Marxist method and the way how it was used by the regime in the Soviet Union was in the center of reflection of this left-wing dissident, of the socialist dissidents during all these post-war decades in the Soviet Union. And I think that this legacy is very important as the kind of link with the previous legacy of Bolshevism, revolutionary Marxism, and so on, that was missing in today's, let's say, consciousness of the Russian left.
Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go into it, but just to wrap up that point, can you explain the difference intellectually that there existed between those Marxists and other dissidents operating in the early period of what's called the thaw, the post-Stalin Khrushchev period, versus those trying to work through the, more reactionary Brezhnev period? How much did it change over those years between, say, the mid 1950s, late 1950s, early 1960s, and into the 1970s and 80s?
Definitely, there are different periods. Because not only socialist dissidents, but dissidents as the phenomena were started in the late 50s. And it was started not in the form of let's say human rights movement as it became later on, but it was started as the political movement. As the political movement, which was not satisfied with Khrushchev's program of de-Stalinization, which was trying to search for some more proper Marxist understanding of why Stalinism was was possible, what was the reason why this degeneration of the initial Lenin's project was possible in Soviet Union, and that was the movement which had the political perspective. How to even to push current elite for some more radical social and political changes in the Soviet Union. But later on, under Brezhnev, after the wave of the first wave of repressions against the dissident movement, the perspective of this movement changed. And let's say from late 60s the main kind of idea of the for the most of dissidents in the Soviet Union was not a political change, but a struggle for basic human rights. So you can say that the ethics somehow replaced the politics. And in at that moment, let's say the socialists, the left wingers, they became a minority in the dissident movement, which act in the cooperation with this mainstream kind of human rights dissidents, but in the same time they were trying to establish their own analysis of the of the Soviet Union, of the ruling bureaucracy, and so on. So in my book, I focused mostly not around the history, like the groupings, the individuals, and so on, but mostly I focused on the programs. I focused on the ideas, and you can find there kind of explanations of the various ideas of the different left-wing dissident groupings. So I think in this sense this piece of this book, because my book is not just about the socialist dissidents, but I think that this dissidents chapter is very much relevant because it presents a kind of different opportunities, and different type of continuity with the current Russian left. Because of course, if you look at the Communist Party for now, if you look at the most of this Stalinist, chauvinist groups that supported the invasion, you can see how their explanations came from the legacy of Stalinism, and especially the late Stalinism, the Stalinism of the late 40s and early 50s, when the whole Russian chauvinist imperialist rhetorics was adopted by Stalin and his government.
Part of the reason it's important to kind of excavate this tradition of Russian socialist analysis and Marxist analysis is because we do have not only that historic legacy, obviously goes without saying, but we have these questions today that are still being debated that require, in my view at least, a Marxist analysis. And the obvious question, the one that continues to be debated, is how do we describe Russia and Russia's war in Ukraine? Is this to be understood as an imperialist war? Is Russia a junior imperialist? Is this an inter-imperialist conflict? Many formulations of this question. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to not so much say, is this an imperialist war, but to what extent is Russia's invasion to be understood as an imperialist war? Maybe another way to say that, to what extent can our Marxist tools, going back to Lenin and Lenin's definition of imperialism and all the way forward, to what extent can we apply that understanding and that method to understanding Russia today?
So I will say that unfortunately, most of the left, like internationally, they still reduce the understanding of imperialism only to, let's say, economic interests. Yes, so you have this very poor understanding that, okay, you have the objective economic needs of some collective capitalist elite. You have a state which act as a tool of this interest, and that's how the imperialist wars are organized. And that is not true. It's not definitely true even for United States, for example, David Harvey explained in his book New Imperialism. The war in Iraq was not just a war for oil. Of course, there were the interest of the oil corporations and so on, but they came after the interests of the state, which were mostly military, political, and ideological. Yeah, and they didn't only serve the interests of financial groups, and that is very important part of Lenin's analysis of imperialism, because I think what is very important moment in Lenin's analysis is that in imperialism you have, as Lenin explained, they change the whole relations between the state and the capital. Yeah, you have a kind of merge between the state and the capital, and you can't say that the state continue to serve just as the some committee. Political committee for the big capital. So in this sense, you can say that Russian war is definitely imperialist, but is not just something that related to economic interests of Russian capitalist class. It's also a big problem with the very understanding what is the Russian capitalist class, because if you are talking about the Russian capitalist class like politically, that it is a kind of political some kind of political entity with its own political agenda, with its own political interests. So in this sense, you can say that the Russian capitalist class doesn't exist, because it has no any political agency. Yes, so it was totally politically expropriated by the state in the very beginning of Putin's rule in the early 2000s. So in this sense, you can say that is imperialist war, but imperialist in terms of military and political domination, because the whole consciousness of the Russian political elite, of the Russian ruling elite, is based on the idea that the whole post-Soviet space is the part of the some kind of natural interests of Russia, also in terms of military political control. And this invasion is definitely a result of the loss of any forms of hegemony. And you see how the Russian regime lost its hegemony, its political hegemony, its ideological hegemony in the post-Soviet space, and you see how it is trying to replace this loss of hegemony by the military presence, by the pure force. Yes.
And this is true. This is true not only in Ukraine. We saw Russia send its military into Kazakhstan in January of 2022 to put down a workers' uprising. We know Russia's been involved in destabilization efforts in Moldova and elsewhere. So it's certainly not relegated only to Eastern Ukraine.
No. It's not only about Ukraine. It's about the Caucasus. It's about the Central Asia, about Moldova, and so on. Because everywhere you basically had the same problem, the same attempts of Russia to dominate, like politically in the area, and lack of lack of possibility to gain to keep the political and ideological influence. Yeah, and I think, of course, it's a big question how it happened. How it happened that Ukraine, for example, that let's say 20 years ago was the country where the vast majority of the population in various surveys definitely supported all types of economic and political cooperation with Russia, which rejected the NATO membership. So if you look at the surveys in the early 2000s, there were less than 10% of Ukrainians who supported the affiliation with NATO. Yeah, how this country with this population, with all this role of the Russian language in this country, because I was in Ukraine like many times. I remember like Kiev, some 20 years ago, and that was mostly Russian speaking city. Yeah, without any strong anti-Russian sentiment at all. So it was impossible 20 years ago to imagine a strong Russian anti-Russian sentiment in Kiev. So how this country was turned to a country where people massively refuse to use Russian language, even if the Russian language is their mother tongue language, and they refused to use it because of the political and ideological reasons, because it's the enemy as the enemy's language, is the language of the of the other state that is trying to destroy their sovereignty, their right for the self-determination, and so on. And I think this transit from one condition to another happened because of the course of the Russian government, which was imperialist, not only like economic imperialist, but also imperialist politically and ideologically. So, which means that they never fully recognized the right of Ukraine to exist. So what you have now in this official's explanation, that the look at the maps of the 17th century, you can't find Ukraine on this map. Yeah, that was I'm not joking. That was from one of the recent Putin's meetings. They were researching this map together with some of his bureaucrats. So they never recognized the very agency of Ukraine. They never recognized the agency of the Central Asian republics or states like Armenia. So for what you have now coming from the Russian officials openly was existed like years and years before, but not on the public sphere. Mm-hmm. So now you have a kind of coming out of all this imperialist aggressive aggressive sentiments. And I think if we look at the imperialism as phenomena, we can identify it also as a kind of worldview of the elites of one or another
Hmm.
state, as the way how they understand the world, the relations between the countries, how they understand their like a fundamental inequality between the various
Hmm.
countries. Yeah. And that is very typical for any sort of imperialism.
No question about it. We'll have to leave it there. Ilya Budraitskis has been my guest today. Ilya is a historian and political activist. He is a member of the Russian Socialist Movement and author. The book, Dissidents Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia. Make sure you get yourselves a copy of that. Ilya, thank you so much for coming to Counterpunch and chatting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Uh, thank you so much.
Listeners, viewers, thank you as always, and we will chat again very soon.